It was my birthday yesterday, so if you think I do a good job, if you love my book recommendations, if you've gotten a lot out of this channel and you want to give me a birthday present, I did that all in one breath. Consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really appreciate your help. You have no idea what $1 or $3 a month can do. Thank you. Here's everything I read in April, which isn't as much as usual. I love doing these monthly wrap-ups, and in doing so I've noticed that I typically read like 13, maybe up to 15 books a month. I read 10 this month. And it's because I was extraordinarily busy doing lots of other stuff. But I did kind of stick to my goal. At the start of April, I talked about what 10 books I wanted to read, and I think I read 8 of them. Swapped 2 out for 2 different ones, but yeah. I wanted to read 10, I read 10. I wanted to read those specific 10, and I read most of them. That's not bad. But what were they? Let's go. We'll start off on a weird note. I think I had some bad takes this month. 2, to be specific, and let's just go through those 2 first. This is Who's Afraid of Gender by Judith Butler. I struggled with this book, and in my video I explained why. Basically, I don't know who this book is for. The people who've been suckered into the culture war around trans people and also the roles and rights of women are not going to read this book. And trans people like myself who pay a lot of attention to the cultural zeitgeist, to the politics of our world, to the politics around social issues and the existence of trans and queer people, etc. We know everything that's in here, more or less. So I wasn't sure who this book was for. And in the comments, I got a lot of enlightenment from various people, most of whom all said the same thing, that this book is for the people in the middle, the people who do not hate trans and queer people. They are not bigoted, they are not turfy, blah blah blah. And they want to be allies maybe, but they don't know much. And I kind of naively assumed that that middle group didn't really exist. And this is because of the world that I live in, the echo chamber that I'm in, where everyone is with us or against us. And it's very difficult not to fall into that echo chamber. I live in it. But as it turns out, the majority of people are ignorant to the existence and the struggles of trans and queer people, and they want to know more, they want to learn more, they want to understand better, they want to be good allies. Most people are ignorant but positive, and this is who that book is for. I didn't really think about this enormous majority of people in the middle who are neither the loud bigots nor the tired, fed-up trans and queer people. Everyone else is in that middle ground, and that's who this book is for. So go watch my video, but just bear in mind, I'm pretty sure it's a bad take now looking back on it. My other bad take, although I'm not yet sure it was a bad take because I think I need to revisit the book, was this, The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor. I love the poetry of Joelle Taylor. I talked about that in my review. I think her poetry is exceptional. She is a queer, working class poet who writes really incredible stuff. And this is her debut novel after decades of writing amazing poetry. But I really struggled with this book as well. And that's because it is not a novel that uses poetic language like so many brilliant, beautiful novels do. It's a novel that is actually structured using poetic devices. And that's different from just having very beautiful, flowery language. When I think about beautiful novels, the first thing that pops into my head is the picture of Dorian Gray, one of the most beautiful things I've ever read, or at least most beautiful pieces of prose. And this is prose, but it is so structured by and reliant on poetic devices, not just poetic language. They're different things, and I really struggled with that as I read this. I didn't like the fact that this was prose and poetry combined. I wanted it to be one or the other. There was a dissonance there that I couldn't get over. And I had a lot of people in the comments asking me what the big deal is, what the problem is with this. And for me, as I said in the video, there was a disconnect between me and the characters and the story. The poetic devices distracted. It was all gorgeous writing, and I read out a few examples of things that really moved me. But I kind of wish this had just been poetry, or just been a novel full of beautiful language. Instead, it's a novel written with poetic devices, and that confused my tiny little brain. It's not necessarily a bad take, because that's how I felt. It's not a take, fake, it's a feeling, but I still kind of feel bad in retrospect, and also a little bit naive, like I didn't put in the work while I was reading this, and maybe I need to give it another go when I'm in a better headspace. One book that I read and loved with all my heart is A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. This will undoubtedly be one of my favourite novels of this year. I am obsessed with this thing. I think about it constantly. This is a very, very Frankenstein-inspired, Victorian, queer, gothic horror novel. It ticks off everything that I love in fiction. Please go watch my video. Everyone who loves anything that I just mentioned, queer fiction, historical fiction, gothic fiction, horror fiction, any one of those categories, you need to read this book. And if you love all of it as much as I do, this will be your new obsession too. A Botanical Daughter is set in the Victorian period, in a botanical garden on a hill, where two men who are in love both work, one as a botanist, the other as a taxidermist. And early in the novel, they are given the opportunity to bring a plant to life in a more human way. They create a daughter out of plants. It is incredible. Whenever I do these end of month wrap-ups, I always mention that I have a video, you can go check it out. Go watch my video to learn more, blah, blah, blah. This one, like, please, I'm not going to say any more about this. Please go watch my video so you can watch me go absolutely nuts about this incredible piece of queer historical gothic fiction. The very first book I read this month was Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I made that video before I went to an event in Glasgow where Tchaikovsky was in conversation with another author, Lauren Bucas. Now, I've never read Bucas before, and I really, really want to now. Her books sound absolutely wonderful. But while I was there, Tchaikovsky signed this book. He's a lovely guy. That's actually the second time I've met him, and he signed another one of my books the first time I met him in London. He's the sweetest guy in science fiction, and alongside Becky Chambers, he is my favourite science fiction author. The work he does is impeccable. His imagination is broad, it feels almost infinite, and I had so many ideas about how his mind must work when it comes to the plotting and writing of his stories, and he went into all of it during that conversation. It was a really, really lovely talk. I sat right in the front row and I just listened to them talk about how their brains work, how they come up with their ideas, how they structure their stories, and they talked a lot about politics because as Tchaikovsky's books have gone on, he's become more and more political, or at least more vocally political through his fiction. And this is very much a political novel. But it's also, once again, a really fascinating look at a weird world that is entirely Tchaikovsky's own creation. But the strangeness of the world in Alien Clay actually mirrors and thematically loops back into the politics. It is wonderfully circular and brilliantly clever. Alien Clay is one of the best sci-fi novels I've read in years and years and years. I read and reviewed 3 brand new novels in April, and this is one of them, The Secret Life of Insects by Bernardo Esquinca. He is a Mexican author, and this was translated from the Spanish by James D. Jenkins, and this book also includes an introduction by Mariana Enriquez, who is a legend of Argentinian fiction. Enriquez's intro is great because she wrote it, and this is a collection of weird, often very Lovecraftian or Edgar Allan Poe inspired gothic stories. They are twisted, they are strange, they are scary, and they are often just very, very weird. But as I said in my review, these are enormously hit and miss stories. They swing, as I said in my video, like a pendulum back and forth between really, really excellent tales and really, really mid or even just awkward and disappointing stories. This isn't a particularly long book, but a lot of fat could have still been cut. A lot of stories were just not worth reading at all, and that was a real bummer. But there were a lot that were. When I did my review, I went through all of the ones that I particularly loved, including the title story, The Secret Life of Insects. Some of these stories are chillingly dark. And if you love the works of Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft, racism aside, then this is a book for you, even though not all of the stories are good. Luckily, this has no racism in it. Esquinca is a wonderful writer. I just wanted all of these stories to hit the mark, because the ones that soar really, really fly high, and I wish all the stories did. It's a real pendulum swing between great and bad. But I still recommend it because it's a genre that I love and the stories that are good are absolutely worth the price of admission. Another brand new book that I reviewed was Eric LaRocca's This Skin Was Once Mine, a collection of 4 incredible horror stories. Now, as I said in my video, this is not my favorite Eric LaRocca collection. I didn't like it as much as The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, or as much as Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. But Eric LaRocca is one of the great horror writers working today, and something that isn't his best is still incredible because he's the best. That said, it's been a few weeks since I read and reviewed this, and the stories in here have really stuck with me, especially the last one. The final story in here has really twisted a knife in me. In fact, just this morning I was running in my local park and I saw an old woman sitting on a bench and I thought about that story. It has wormed its way into my brain and there it will stay. If you love good queer horror stories, Eric LaRocca is the best. And every single time a new Eric LaRocca book comes out, it's a gift. It is a time for celebration for horror fans. And the third book that I read and reviewed and really enjoyed this month was Delicate Condition. This is by Danielle Valentine. She has actually written under a bunch of different pseudonyms, including this one. This is her first novel for adults, and so I guess she picked a new pseudonym. I think that's kind of fun. Delicate Condition is very much Rosemary's Baby, but in a far more aggressively feminist and modern sense. It is Rosemary's Baby for the 21st century. It tells the story of a woman who used to be a child actress, and she was pretty successful, and then she continued acting but didn't see much success until very recently, and now she might just get nominated for an Oscar for a really good independent film she just made. But more important than any of that is the fact that she and her husband really want to get pregnant. She's dancing around the age of 40 and she kind of knows it's now or never, biological clock, blah blah blah. They're going through IVF and it's all she really cares about. But weird things start to happen as soon as she manages to actually get that positive test. Weird people come into her life, stalkers. Strange things start happening to her. She gets weird pains that shouldn't be there. At one point, a stranger comes into her bedroom and escapes before she can do anything. She's being followed and she has no idea why. This is a really good thriller. There are horror elements, especially body horror, but this is far more thriller than horror. So if you enjoy mysteries and thrillers, but you're not a big fan of horror, I reckon this is a good fit for you. There's a little bit of horror in there. It'll make you feel a bit uneasy and queasy at times, but it's far more thriller than anything else. And I really enjoyed it. Immortality, a love story by Dana Schwartz is a book I read just before I went on vacation. I didn't do a dedicated video on it because it's a direct sequel, and I did a video on the first book, Anatomy, a Love Story, about a year ago. I finally got round to reading the sequel and I didn't feel like it warranted a video of its own because it's a sequel. It's weird reviewing a sequel without going over the first book again, so I just didn't. However, I do recommend it. I recommend both of them. They are a fantastic duology of books. If you enjoyed Anatomy and you're wondering what Immortality is like, it's a great sequel. It's not quite as good as Anatomy in my opinion. It doesn't have the same weight to it. It doesn't have the same originality to it because it's a sequel. Anatomy had a lot of punch because it felt very much like a love letter to so much great gothic historical fiction, but also it was doing its own thing, and Immortality just continues the trend. In this book, our protagonist Hazel is working as a doctor, even though she never got a license because she's a woman in early 1800s Edinburgh. But she's not in Edinburgh for too long, she ends up in London. Early on in the book, she is arrested, she's in prison, and she thinks she might get executed, and she's offered a way out, to be moved down to London to treat the princess, so she accepts. While she's down there, she learns more about the things she uncovered in the first book, and she meets a weird secret society of people, one member of which is Lord Byron, and that's a lot of fun. The things she learns and uncovers here are really great. There are a few twists and turns. As far as I remember, Anatomy didn't have any queer elements to it, but this one does, without getting into specifics, and I really appreciated that. Secret societies are always a fun thing in fiction, fiction, and I'm glad that we saw that here. This book is not quite as good as Anatomy, but it is absolutely worth the read if you enjoyed the first book. I loved Anatomy, and I also loved Immortality. It was a great sequel and a satisfying ending to the story. And finally, and I'm not going to say too much about these because this will be an upcoming video, while I was on holiday I read Good Girl, Bad Blood and As Good as Dead. These are the second and third books in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. I read and absolutely adored A Good Girl's Guide to Murder a few months ago, and I thought, yeah, okay, let's do the traditional, stereotypical thing and read some crime novels while I'm on holiday by the beach. So I did. I got through both of these and they're really excellent. They're really, really fantastic. I'm really looking forward to doing a video on it because I think this trilogy has a unique approach to crime fiction. Not just because they're YA books, but because they have a really brilliant trajectory. And it's a trajectory that is also kind of par for the course for YA. In my video, I will absolutely be comparing these to the Hunger Games in a kind of weird way. These books start off as fun crime murder mysteries, and they plunge themselves into much darker depths, and I can't wait to talk about them in an upcoming video very, very soon. 2 videos from now, in fact. There you go, that is everything that I read in April. Once again, if you love what I do, if you want to support me and you want to give me a nice birthday present, you can support me on Patreon and subscribe for books.